Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. My name is the Faniac. Okay, now you guys may be wondering who exactly I am. Well, to put it as best as I can, I would describe myself as a more laid-back critic. And before you go searching it on the web or Google, whatever you do, let me just say that I would describe the job as a more of a means of not just viewing a movie or TV series practically and just nitpick at the acting or screenwriting or production design. I would rather also take a look and see how invested I could get, see how entertaining it is, how captivated I could get, how much I can get sucked into it. I guess that's the best way of putting it. But now you also may be wondering, why am I doing this? Why do I record myself right now and not just let some other critic just do the same thing I'm doing? Well, let's just say I'm doing this so you guys at home don't have to. With that out of the way, let's take a look at one of the cases in which both looking at it practically and as a means of entertainment can come into play. And one of the rare cases it really does work is none other than 2014's Godzilla. Released in mid-May of 2014, Godzilla roared back into American theaters after a nearly 20-year absence, and not only scored high on the Rotten Tomatoes website, but also left some moviegoers divided. Some thought it was a misunderstood masterpiece, others thought it was a very big pile of kaiju doo-doo. So, which one is the right one? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a good monster movie? Is it not? Well, let's take a deeper dive and see how good it is. This is Godzilla. So we start our movie out with some opening credits. Feels like I'm looking at the projection screen of my history class. But the good news is that it does surprisingly get a lot more interesting from here on, as it not only shows just some drawings of lizards and cavemen, but also gives us some nice little intro into our main movie monster. And it just gets crazier and crazier and crazier from here until we get an explosive finale. I like the title of the movie. Awesome. So as we transition into our next scene, which is now in the Philippines, we get a look at Dr. Sarasawa, played by Ken Watanabe, and the girl from The Shape of Water, played by Sally Hawkins. Back up to the land in a mining community where, with the chief, they talk and discover that a radiation leak has now occurred. Well, obviously. To investigate this phenomena, they dress up in their tidy-whitey hazmat suits and eventually find what they're looking for.
Oh my god. Is it possible?
Oh, so that's where my doggy ran off to. You know, I always wondered what happened to him. So while still in shock and awe of the enormous T-bone, they soon find a flashing sunbeam shining upon them. Out of curiosity, they woke up to it and soon find good old Wormy's path. Shortly after, we find ourselves drumrolled into Japan. It is there we then meet a young boy who prepares for his father's birthday, the latter played by Bryan Cranston.
All of that, I'm an engineer and I don't like unexplained frequency patterning near a plant where I'm responsible.
You know, let me just say this from the bottom of my heart. This guy frickin' steals the entire movie, and I really mean it in the best possible way. This guy, single-handedly, with every inch of his soul, I believe, is giving his all. His acting is phenomenal. It goes way above the line for any normal monster movie. And it's very, very, very rare that we ever find a cast this actually invested in a monster movie, no less, and giving their all. It's very, very rarely we find it, especially in this case. I mean, Godzilla really did, especially in 1996 with Matthew Broderick, Harry Shearer. Literally, it was just a Simpsons reunion just wrapped up in a big bucket of fish. Come on. I'm sorry, I'm just losing track here, but the acting is superb here. But eventually we do run into some your average run-of-the-mill antics when, of course, he ignores everything and eventually finds himself talking to his wife about issues in the plan while also forgetting it's his own birthday.
Happy birthday.
What? Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, I forgot all about it. Yeah,
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I should have a birthday more often.
Alright, hold on. So, it's already hard enough for someone to forget their own anniversary, but how on earth can someone forget their own freaking birthday? I mean, by God, who in heck has ever forgotten when on earth they were born? It's never really happened. Literally, one of the very few days in the entire calendar of the entire year I look forward to are birthdays, especially my own. I remember everyone's birthday, especially my own. So, tell me this. Have you ever met a person who has single-handedly forgotten their own birthday? I mean, by God, you really never ever meet a person who does. Literally, all hail to you, your ignorance. Sorry, lost track here. Let's just move on. So they talk a little bit in the car, then drive off, and then Mr. Cranston then talks with the chief engineer as well as another physicist about whatever the heck is going on at the plant. He then explains of how this cannot be an earthquake, as earthquakes would usually come at random, while this one has a consistent pattern. So, out of fear, he eventually calls upon his wife, who's still stuck down. He then goes to rescue her, but all attempts fail, and then we get, of course, our emotional scene. So Cranston makes it out of the plant alright, but of course the plant is destroyed, and then we get a very cool shot from the POV of the schoolboy. We then cut to 15 years later. Okay, would it be the largest time gap I've ever had? After taking a few hours in Afghanistan, Dad comes home to have some cake, play with his kid, put his kid to sleep, and then mistaking his shtick for his guns. The good news is that this scene is cut short as the wife, played by Elizabeth Olsen, finds out that Mr. Bland's father has been arrested in Japan for trespassing on restricted property. And the good news is that when we do go to Japan, we honestly get some pretty good chemistry between Cranston and Mr. Bland. Yeah, that's what I'm going to call it from now. I'm sorry. This is just no easier way for me to put it. I can't remember this guy's name, so I'm just calling it that. We really do get some interesting things, although the scene with the paper clips can be debatable, but I'm not really going to go into all that stuff. At least not today. Maybe another day. So Cranston reveals to his son that he snuck in as he believes that the restricted property that should be lethally dangerous is not actually, and the air should be perfectly clean. The son, of course, eventually, at first, doesn't see his way, but eventually both end up traveling there and, of course, discovering that Cranston was right. As per usual, the crazy guy is always correct. That's like sci-fi number 102. Okay, 102. But of course, this is kind of a long movie, so I'm going to cut this short. They prove that his theory was correct. Reminisce, get caught by the government, and then we get some kaiju action going around. The bad news is that this is, I think, 20-30 minutes in, and outside of the opening credits, we haven't even gotten Godzilla, the main star. Not even one single mention, not one single frame. Outside of the opening credits, not one mere mention of our star. We paid to see Godzilla, people, so where is he? We'll start getting used to this, as we will not get Godzilla for, I think, another half hour or so. Yep, wait a week, people. Wait a week. So they eventually find out that the cause of the plan was done by this creature called Muto, also known as Massive Unidentified Terrestrial Organism. Good to know they bring some kind of realism into this, but I find it really interesting, especially considering when the thing was originally dormant but is now hatching and eventually wakes up. Alright, time to greet the world, eat some people, and then do some mating. No! He kills Bryan Cranston? What the heck? I'm sorry, but who on earth would kill Bryan Cranston, especially in a freaking movie about Godzilla? Oh, no, wait. Now that I think about it, I think I do understand now. Cranston couldn't finish filming as he had needed to do back surgery because he was carrying the weight of this entire movie. Now that makes sense. So after you-know-who's death, the kaiju action soon stops, and then we soon find ourselves transporting into a helicarrier, and then Mr. Blanket's taught a history lesson, and then we go all the way back to Japan. Yeah, it feels pretty interesting there, and the only reason I believe they taught him a history lesson was due to the fact that they show Godzilla, and actually mentioned his name. Bad news is that with the frames we see of him, we already saw. The first glimpse of him in the entire movie, and it's already a repeat of what we already saw in the opening credits. Interesting choice, to say the least. At least we do get to hear his name. I find that pretty cool nonetheless. So of course we come back to Japan as he finds himself on a one-way ticket back to San Francisco via train. Because of course the only way to travel halfway across the world is by train. It is the only way, after all. But the good news is that the kaiju action doesn't just stop there, as the Muto eventually finds himself going there as well, rapping and stopping and eating some nuclear waste. Well, at least we know what his diet is now. So as stated before, he just romps, stops, and then finally we get what we paid for. A giant tsunami swirls in, the entire town is covered in water. The military then fires flares, but then suddenly something deep, black, and filled with scales rises out of the deep trenches of the water. We hear some stomping, little growls, and then we pan up, and then we see in all of his glory, Godzilla. His entrance is just so epic, no words can describe it. So I'm just going to show it to you. Words cannot describe how terrifyingly epic that scene already is. I believe everyone can agree on that. So then we finally get some kaiju action, or we just cut to the kid as he sees the aftermath. Interesting choice, but the good news is that there's plenty more to go around, as this basically is the entire rest of the movie. Read and weep, people. Read and weep. So we then go back to Sarazawa as he talks about Godzilla, and also we discovered that there's a female Muto. Oh yeah, right, because apparently there was 2 spores they actually found, but of course the other one was dormant, so they just threw it in the trash can. Okay, I may be nitpicking here, but let me just ask one question. If you find a giant animal that predates basically all of humanity, going back to the dinosaurs, you find it alive but dormant, and the most intelligent thing you think you could do after testing it, finding that it is dormant, is just store it away and basically just throwing it like a piece of paper in the trash can. What the hell? I'm sorry. But who on... I'm sorry, not on Earth, because I'm sorry, this goes bigger than Earth. Who in the freaking universe would ever allow that? I'm sorry, but this is like a giant freaking dinosaur. He's asleep. You just said, oh, let's just kindly transport him all the way to our facility, and we in no way can expect him to wake him up. It's the equivalency of literally the Lost World. They transport a sleeping T-Rex and hope he doesn't wake up, only to have him wake up and wreak havoc. It's the exact equivalency of that. And the hilarious part is, they're both freaking lizards. You know, this is already one big comparison, but for a Godzilla movie, there shouldn't really be comparisons all the way back to Jurassic Park. There never should be. Despite how much I love The Lost World, there is no way that Godzilla should be compared to that movie. No way. So we then find out that, of course, she woke up, and we find ourselves heading to Las Vegas. The power goes out, Havoc is about to be wrecked, and of course we jump cut all the way to the aftermath. So eventually we find Mr. Bland rejoining the military and transporting some heavily equipped nuclear warheads to try to destroy the Mutos, as well as, I think, Godzilla. But the horrifying news is that, of course, something goes awry. The nuclear warheads are, of course, somewhat, I think, destroyed, because I think they eat them. But the bad news is that we eventually do get one of the more tense scenes, as in order to evade a giant 10-foot freaking kaiju, they instead hide above a bridge. It really surprised me how something as ridiculous as that sounds can be so tense. It really surprises me. But eventually we do get some really cool but the good news is that this does result in a sweet action scene. So then we cut to the next day where Mr. Bland wakes up, Havoc is wrecked, the aftermath is shown, and then we jump cut all the way to San Francisco as the city is evacuated. Olsen is volunteering, trying to get her son out, of course trying to help all the people out, and then eventually we get, single-handedly, the single best Godzilla entrance ever. I know I said that about the previous scene, but really, look at this scene. This scene really takes its time to get him out. The first one had the honor of showing so little of him that we eventually got to see him. We were so awesome. It was so awesome that we couldn't handle it. This one is so visually epic, we cannot handle it. As he literally, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is able to just brush off two freaking helicarriers as well as just walk through the Golden Gate Bridge. It is as epic and crazy as that sounds. And then eventually the two Mutos do meet up with him, some crazy action's about to go down, and then of course we cut tonight where a bunch of Halo jumpers are about to jump off. Because this is Godzilla, people. So then we get a nice POV of Mr. Bland as he jumps out of the plane, and we do actually get a pretty interesting sequence of him actually seeing Godzilla. It's quite epic, yet also very terrifying and realistic. It's very rarely that I can actually say that this is possibly the most arguably realistic interpretation of how a monster movie should be. I'm saying should because it doesn't mean, I don't mean this is how every movie needs to be. But it just surprises me of how realistic it can be. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But then, of course, we do find out that the Mutos mated and the female is pregnant. Yeah, it's a side note, but of course they kind of make it a big deal as Mr. Bland eventually blows it up. And then we see the female Mewtwo actually stare down at him. I'm sorry, another nitpick here, but unless she has night vision, how in the heck can she see this little guy? I'm sorry, this guy's little. This female Mewtwo is like the size of my arm, from the tip of my finger to here. This guy is right here. So how in heaven and earth can she, without night vision, this is without night vision, see this guy in the middle of the dark with red everywhere? I'm sorry, it just really, really fascinates me. Unless she has night vision, how in heck can she see this freaking guy? Especially considering how bland he is. You know, actually, that would be a good concept for a movie. A person becomes invisible by just being so bland. Now that's a good movie. But the good news is that we do eventually get the exact action we paid for as, without a doubt, the single best moment of this entire movie thus comes into play. The sheer terror and epicness of the scene cannot be put into words. It just can't. You really just have to watch these scenes on their own to understand how truly beautiful they really are. The bad news is that this scene doesn't last as long as it should. We then cut to Mr. Bland trying to, of course, wipe out the entire city. But then we get the Mewtwo again staring down right at him in the middle of the night. Still do not understand unless they have night vision. The good news is that this scene is ended relatively quickly by, of course, the big man himself. So Godzilla thus destroys the last Mewtwo. He saves the day. Mr. Bland thus wakes up the next day. The city's not destroyed. He reunites with his family. Godzilla takes a nap, wakes up, and then goes waddling back into the ocean, waiting his next payment. And this was 2014's Godzilla. It has its pros, it has its cons, but in all honesty, it's still pretty good. I think a lot of it, especially with this movie, and pretty much like The Stand, all comes down to the acting. A lot of the actors sell the heck out of it. Cranston, Watanabe, Hawkins, and pretty much every other military official really do sell it. They bring such drama and epicness that really shouldn't be in a monster movie. It just never really happened. So, yes, I still recommend it. I believe everyone, or at least if you're interested in this movie, I would highly recommend watching this. It's very, very good. The acting is top-notch, and this wraps up our first review ever. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. My name is the Faniac. I do this so you people at home don't have to.